Princess Vela stood at the window of her small palace and looked at the empty sky. 300 years ago, she had lived in the grand palace with her father, King Tharos. She had worn the finest clothes. She had eaten the best food. Servants had bowed before her wherever she walked. But that life was gone now. Her father had sent her away to this cold, forgotten moon at the edge of the Keth Empire. He had thrown her away like broken furniture. The reason was simple. She could not have children. For 3 centuries, her father had brought noble males to her. They were tall and strong, with silver skin like hers and 4 powerful arms. They came from the best families in the empire. Their blood was pure. Their genetics were perfect. But no matter how many times she tried, Vela's body refused to create life. The royal doctors examined her many times. They used their best machines. They tried their strongest medicines. Nothing worked. Finally, the head doctor stood before King Tharos and spoke the words that destroyed Vela's life. "The princess is incompatible," he said. "Her womb cannot carry a child. She is barren." The king's face turned hard as stone. In the Keth Empire, a royal who could not produce an heir was worthless. Vela was his only child. Without her children, his bloodline would end. His dynasty would die. Everything he had built for 10,000 years would turn to dust. He could not look at his daughter anymore. So he sent her away. Now, Vela ruled a tiny outpost on a moon that nobody cared about. A few thousand Keth lived here, mining rocks and growing food. They were poor and simple people. They did not care that their governor was a disgraced princess. They only cared about surviving another day. Vela had learned to accept her fate. She woke up each morning. She did her work. She went to sleep each night. The years passed slowly, one after another, like drops of water falling into an endless ocean. She stopped hoping for anything better. Hope was for people who had a future. She had none. Then the humans came. Their ship appeared in the sky one morning without warning. It was small and strange-looking, nothing like the elegant vessels of the Keth Empire. Vela watched it land near her palace with curiosity and suspicion. She had heard stories about humans. They were a young species from a distant planet called Earth. They lived very short lives, less than 100 years. They were weak and fragile, with soft skin and only 2 arms. Most Keth considered them barely worth noticing. A group of humans walked out of the ship. They wore strange clothes and carried strange devices. Their leader was a tall female with yellow hair who smiled too much and talked too loudly. She said they had come to discuss trade between Earth and the Keth Empire. Vela did not care about trade, but she had nothing else to do, so she agreed to meet with them. Among the humans was a quiet male named Doan. He was not tall or impressive. He did not smile too much or talk too loudly. He simply watched everything with calm, curious eyes. Vela noticed that while the other humans seemed nervous around the Keth, Doan showed no fear at all. He studied her people with the same interest a scientist might show. When examining a new flower, she learned that he was a xenobiologist. His job was to study alien life forms. He had spent his whole career traveling to different worlds and learning about different species. The Keth fascinated him, he said. Their biology was unlike anything he had seen before. Most Keth would have been offended by his staring. Vela found it oddly refreshing. Vela found it oddly refreshing. At least he was honest about his curiosity. The trade negotiations continued for several weeks. Vela met with the human diplomats during the day and returned to her empty palace at night. Nothing about her life changed. Nothing ever changed on this forgotten moon. Then the raiders came. They attacked at midnight, when most of the outpost was sleeping. Their ships filled the sky like angry insects. They fired weapons at buildings and set fires everywhere. Vela heard screaming outside her window. She grabbed her weapon and ran outside to help her people. The scene was terrible. Buildings were burning. People were running in every direction. The raiders were a gang of criminals who attacked small outposts and stole everything valuable. They did not care about lives. They only cared about profit. Vela fought alongside her guards, but there were too many raiders. She ordered her people to retreat to the emergency shelters. As she ran through the burning streets, she saw something that made her stop. The human, Dohwan, was carrying 2 Keth children on his back. The children were almost as big as he was. Their weight should have crushed him. But he kept moving step by step through the smoke and fire. His face was covered in sweat and ash. His arms were shaking. But he did not stop. The other human diplomats had already fled to their ship. They were probably halfway to safety by now. But Dohwan had stayed behind to save children who were not even his own species. Vela ran to help him. Together, they carried the children to the shelter. When they finally reached safety, Dohwan collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. His hands were burned. His clothes were torn. He looked like he might die at any moment, but he smiled at her. "Are they okay?" he asked, looking at the children. Vela stared at this strange, fragile creature. Humans were supposed to be weak. They were supposed to be selfish. Every species in the galaxy looked after its own kind first. Yet this human had nearly killed himself to save Keth children he had never met before. She realized in that moment that everything she had heard about humans was wrong. They were not weak at all. They were something far more dangerous. They were stubborn. And stubborn creatures could change the universe. After the raid, most of the human diplomats returned to Earth. They said the outpost was too dangerous. They promised to send help, but Vela knew they would forget about this tiny moon as soon as their ship left the sky. That was how the galaxy worked. Nobody cared about forgotten places, but Dohwan stayed. He said Earth needed someone to continue the diplomatic work. He said his research on Keth biology was not finished. He gave many good reasons for staying. Vela suspected the real reason was simpler. He had nowhere else he wanted to be. The months passed slowly. The outpost rebuilt itself after the raid. Life returned to normal. But something had changed for Vela. For the first time in centuries, she had someone to talk to. Dohwan visited her palace almost every day. At first, they discussed official business, trade agreements, supply shipments, boring things that neither of them really cared about. But slowly, their conversations grew longer and deeper. They talked about their homes, their families, their dreams, their fears. Dohwan told her about Earth. It was a small blue planet covered mostly with water. Humans had lived there for only a few 100,000 years. In that short time, they had gone from living in caves to traveling among the stars. They had fought terrible wars against each other. They had made beautiful art and music. They had nearly destroyed their planet many times, but they always found a way to survive. Vela was amazed. The Keth Empire was 10,000 years old, but it had changed very little in all that time. The same families held power. The same traditions ruled society. The same beliefs shaped every mind. Humans were different. They changed constantly. They adapted to everything. They refused to accept that anything was impossible. "Your species is very strange," Vela told him one evening. They sat together on the balcony of her palace, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. Dohwan laughed. "We say the same thing about ourselves," he replied. "We do not always understand why we are the way we are. We just know that we cannot stop. We must always move forward. We must always try new things. It is in our blood." Vela taught him about the Keth in return. She showed him how to read their ancient writing. She explained their complex system of noble houses and bloodlines. She took him to the bioluminescent forests on the far side of the moon, where the trees glowed with soft blue light and strange animals sang in the darkness. Do-won looked at everything with wonder. He asked 1,000 questions. He wrote notes in a small book he always carried. But he never treated the Keth as lesser beings. He treated them as equals worthy of respect and understanding. One night, he shared something that made Vela's heart stop. They were sitting in his small laboratory. Machines hummed around them. Screens showed complicated data that Vela did not understand. Do-won looked tired but excited. He had been working on something for weeks, and now he was ready to explain it. "I have been studying Keth fertility," he said carefully. "I wanted to understand why your birth rates are falling. Every generation, fewer children are born. If this continues, your empire will die within a few thousand years." Vela felt cold. She knew the numbers were bad, but hearing a human say it so directly made it feel more real. "Our doctors have studied this problem for centuries," she said. "They found no solution?" Do-won nodded. "That is because they were looking in the wrong direction. They believed the answer was more purity, more careful selection of mates, more control over bloodlines. But that is exactly what caused the problem in the first place." He showed her a screen filled with genetic data. "Your species has become too similar," he explained. "For thousands of years, you bred only with those whose blood was considered pure. You removed all differences from your population. Now your genes are so alike that your bodies struggle to create new life. You have bred yourselves into a corner." Vela felt sick. Everything her people believed about purity and noble blood was wrong. It was not saving them. It was killing them. "Is there any hope?" she whispered. Do-won hesitated. Then he spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. "Human DNA is very different from Keth DNA. Our genes are remarkably adaptive. We have been mixing with every form of life on our planet for millions of years. It is why we survive so well in so many different environments." He paused and looked directly into her eyes. "Cross-species compatibility is rare in the galaxy, but it is not impossible. Human genetics might be able to combine with Keth genetics in ways that pure Keth blood cannot." Vela understood what he was suggesting. The idea was shocking, scandalous. Her father would be furious. The entire empire would condemn her. But she also understood something else. For 300 years, she had been told she was broken, that her body was wrong, that she would never have a child. Maybe the problem was never with her. Maybe the problem was with who she had been trying to have a child with. She looked at Do-won. This human who had run into fire to save her people. This human who treated her with kindness and respect. This human who looked at her not as a failed princess, but as a woman. Something stirred inside her heart. Something she had not felt for a very long time. Hope. Their first kiss happened on a night when the 3 moons of the planet aligned in the sky. Vela had never kissed anyone with real feeling before. The noble males her father had sent were strangers. They touched her because duty required it. There was no love. There was no warmth. There was only cold obligation. With Do-won, everything was different. His lips were soft against hers. His small human hands held her face with such gentleness that she wanted to cry. When they finally pulled apart, he looked at her with eyes full of emotion, fear, joy, love, all mixed together like colors in a painting. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. His voice was shaking. Vela answered by kissing him again. They did not tell anyone about their relationship. There were no ceremonies, no witnesses, no announcements. In the quiet privacy of her palace, away from the eyes of the galaxy, a princess of the Keth Empire gave herself to a human scientist. It was the most forbidden thing she had ever done. It was also the most beautiful. Weeks turned into months. They stole moments together whenever they could. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. They laughed. They argued. They made up. They learned each other's bodies and hearts. For the first time in her long life, Vela understood what it meant to truly love another person. Then her body began to change. At first, she thought she was sick. She felt tired all the time. Her stomach hurt in the mornings. Her silver skin seemed to glow brighter than usual. She went to the medical machines in Dohwan's laboratory, expecting to find some simple illness. The machines found something else entirely. A heartbeat. Tiny and fast. Growing inside her, Vela stared at the screen for a long time. The image showed a small shape, barely visible, floating in her womb. It was real. It was alive. After 300 years of emptiness, her body had finally created life. She was pregnant. The father was a human. When she told Dohwan, he sat down heavily and put his head in his hands. She could not tell if he was happy or terrified. Perhaps he was both. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "If your father finds out." "He will not find out," Vela replied. "We will be careful. We will hide it until the child is born. Then we will decide what to do." But hiding a royal pregnancy was not easy. Vela's body continued to change in ways she could not control. The glow beneath her skin grew stronger. Her appetite increased. She needed more rest. The servants in her palace began to whisper. They noticed that their princess was different. They did not know why, but they talked among themselves. And where servants whispered, spies listened. King Tharos had eyes everywhere in his empire. Even on a forgotten moon at the edge of space, he had people who reported to him. They told him that his disgraced daughter was spending time with a human. They told him that she seemed healthier and happier than before. They told him that something strange was happening in her palace. The king sent investigators. They asked questions. They watched carefully. They gathered evidence. And finally, one of them managed to access the medical records in Dohwan's laboratory. The truth reached the grand palace like a thunderbolt. King Tharos sat on his throne and read the report 3 times. He could not believe what he was seeing. His daughter, the princess he had thrown away for being barren, was pregnant. The father was not a noble Keth with pure blood. The father was a human, a creature that lived less than 100 years, a species that most Keth considered barely worthy of attention. His rage was terrible. He screamed so loudly that the walls of the palace shook. He threw his crown across the room. He ordered his elite guard to prepare their warships. His daughter had betrayed everything the Keth Empire stood for. She had polluted the royal bloodline with alien genetics. She had destroyed the purity that his ancestors had protected for 10,000 years. The human would die. That was certain. No creature who touched a Keth princess could be allowed to live. And the child? The abomination growing inside his daughter's body? The king could not decide. Part of him wanted it destroyed. But another part, buried deep inside his cold heart, remembered something the doctors had told him long ago. The empire was dying. Birth rates were falling. Soon there would be no children at all. He pushed that thought away. First, he would deal with the human. Then he would decide about the rest. On the forgotten moon, Vela received the message. Her father knew everything. His warships were coming. They would arrive within days. Dohwan began to pack. "We need to run," he said. "We can hide somewhere in human space. My people will protect us." Vela shook her head. She placed her hand on her belly, where their child was growing stronger every day. "No," she said firmly. "I am done running. I am done hiding. I am still a princess of Keth. This child is the heir my father demanded for 3 centuries. He does not get to reject it now." Dohwan looked at her with fear and admiration. "He will kill me," he said. "Maybe," Vela replied. But I will not let him kill our hope. The storm was coming, and they would face it together. The sky turned dark with warships. Vela counted them from her window. 50, 100, 200. More kept coming, filling the sky like a swarm of angry insects. Each ship carried weapons powerful enough to destroy cities. Together, they could turn the entire moon into dust, and ash. King Tharos had sent his elite guard, the most dangerous soldiers in the entire empire. They had crushed rebellions. They had conquered planets. They had never failed in any mission the king had given them. Their commander was Lord Sereth. He was ancient even by Keth standards, with silver skin that had faded to pale gray over the centuries. His forearms were covered with scars from countless battles. His eyes were cold and empty, like windows into a soul that had forgotten how to feel. He served the king with absolute loyalty. He would die before he disobeyed an order. The warships landed around the outpost like a ring of steel. Soldiers poured out by the thousands. They surrounded the palace. They blocked every road. They pointed their weapons at every building. The people of the outpost hid in their homes, terrified of what was about to happen. Lord Sereth stood before the palace gates and spoke, through a device that made his voice echo across the entire outpost. "Princess Vila," he announced, "by order of King Tharos, you are to surrender immediately. The human male called Dohwan is to be delivered to us for execution. Resistance will result in the destruction of this outpost and everyone in it." Inside the palace, Vila and Dohwan listened to the announcement. Vela's hands were shaking, but her face was calm. She had made her decision. She would not surrender. She would not let them take Dohwan. She would fight until her last breath if necessary. But Dohwan had made a different decision. He walked toward the door of the palace. Vela grabbed his arm. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "They will kill you." Dohwan turned to face her. He looked tired and afraid, but there was something else in his eyes. Something steady and determined. Something very human. "If I stay hidden," he said quietly, "they will destroy this entire moon to find me. Thousands of innocent people will die. Your people, Vela, the people who trusted you to protect them." Tears fell down Vela's silver cheeks. "I cannot lose you," she whispered. Dohwan touched her face gently. "You will not lose me," he said. "Humans are very hard to kill. We are stubborn, remember?" He kissed her one last time. Then he walked out of the palace alone. Lord Sereth watched the human approach with cold amusement. This tiny creature, with his soft skin and his 2 weak arms, walked toward an army of thousands without any weapon in his hands. It was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. Dohwan stopped a few steps away from the commander. He looked up at the towering Keth warrior without fear. His heart was pounding in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. "I know what you have come to do," he said. "Before you carry out your orders, I want you to understand something." Lord Sereth tilted his head slightly. He was curious despite himself. Most creatures begged for mercy when they faced him. This one was giving a speech. "I love your princess," Dohwan continued. "I love her more than I love my own life. And I love your people's future. The child she carries is not an abomination. It is hope. It is the answer to a problem your empire has refused to face for thousands of years." Lord Sereth's expression did not change. "You speak of love," he said. "But love does not change law. You defile the royal princess. The punishment is death." "Then kill me," Dohwan replied. "But first, look at this." He held up a small device. With one touch, he sent a file to every ship in the fleet. Every screen on every vessel suddenly showed the same thing. Medical images of the child growing in Vela's womb. Data showing its health, its genetic structure, its heartbeat. The soldiers stared at their screens, They saw a hybrid child, half Keth and half human, developing normally. They saw something that had never existed before in the history of the galaxy. "This child is healthy," Dohwan said, his voice growing stronger. "It will be born. It will live. It will be the heir your king has demanded for 300 years. The only heir his bloodline will ever produce." He looked directly into Lord Sarath's cold eyes. "Kill me, if you must. But you will have to explain to your dying empire why you destroyed its only hope. You will have to tell future generations that you had the chance to save your species, and you chose pride instead." Silence fell over the army. The soldiers looked at each other uncertainly. They had come expecting to punish a criminal. They had not expected to face a choice that could decide the fate of their entire civilization. Lord Sarath stood perfectly still. His hand rested on his weapon. One command from him and the human would die. One command and this problem would disappear. But the data on the screens did not lie. The child was real. The child was healthy. And Lord Sarath, despite his loyalty to the king, was not blind. He knew the birth rates were falling. He knew his species was slowly dying. He had watched friends grow old without children. He had seen noble houses fade into extinction. The human stood before him, small and fragile and completely unafraid. Ready to die for love. Ready to die for hope. Something stirred inside Lord Sarath's ancient heart. Something he had not felt in a very long time. His hand slowly moved away from his weapon. He looked at the human for a long moment. Then he spoke 3 words that changed everything. "Lower your weapons." The soldiers obeyed. The guns pointed toward the ground. The threat of death faded away. Dohwan let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. His legs felt weak. He wanted to collapse on the ground and cry with relief. But he stayed standing. He had to stay standing. Lord Sarath turned and walked back toward his ship. Before he entered, he looked over his shoulder at the human one last time. "You are either the bravest creature I have ever met," he said, "or the most foolish. I still do not know which." Then he was gone. The warships lifted into the sky and disappeared among the stars. Vela ran out of the palace and threw herself into Dohwan's arms. She held him so tightly that he could barely breathe. She was laughing and crying at the same time. "You impossible human," she whispered. "You beautiful, stubborn, impossible human." Dohwan smiled weakly. "I told you," he said. "We are very hard to kill." The news spread across the empire like fire in dry grass. Everyone had seen the data that Dohwan sent to the fleet. It was copied and shared billions of times. People on every planet in the Keth Empire looked at the images of the hybrid child and talked about what it meant. Some were disgusted. They called it an abomination. They said the royal bloodline had been destroyed forever. They demanded that Princess Vela be punished for her crime, but many others felt something different. They felt hope. For generations, Keth families had struggled to have children. Young couples tried for decades and remained childless. Noble houses that had lasted for thousands of years slowly disappeared because no heirs were born. The doctors kept saying they were working on solutions. The priests kept saying that purity would save them. But nothing changed. The decline continued. Now there was proof that another path existed. The Barren princess had conceived. The impossible had happened. And the father was a human. King Tharos refused to accept it. He locked himself in his throne room and raged for months. He sent angry messages to Earth, threatening war. He ordered his scientists to prove that the child would be sick or weak or monstrous. He demanded that his nobles reject the abomination, but his power was slipping away. One by one, the great noble houses began to withdraw their support. They did not do this out of love for humans or respect for Vela. They did it because they wanted to survive. The data was clear. Pure Keth blood could no longer create life. Something had to change, or the entire species would die within a few thousand years. Lord Sareth visited the king in his throne room. The old warrior stood before his master and spoke honestly for the first time in centuries. "Your Majesty," he said, "I have served you faithfully for longer than most stars have burned. I have killed your enemies. I have crushed your rebellions. I have never questioned your orders. But I must speak the truth now." The king stared at him with hollow eyes. "What truth?" "The truth is that your granddaughter is our only future. The truth is that your pride cannot feed us or protect us. The truth is that if you destroy this child, you destroy everything our ancestors built." King Tharos said nothing for a long time. He looked older than Lord Sareth had ever seen him. Older and smaller and more tired. "Leave me," the king finally whispered. "I need to think." The months continued to pass. Vela grew larger as the child developed inside her. Dowan stayed by her side every day, watching over her with love and worry. He read books about Keth biology. He talked to doctors about what to expect. He prepared for the arrival of a child that would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Sometimes at night, he would lie awake and wonder what he had done. He was a simple scientist from Earth. He had never expected to fall in love with an alien princess. He had never expected to become the father of a royal heir. He had never expected any of this, but life rarely followed expectations. Especially for humans, the day of the birth arrived on a morning when both suns of the Keth homeworld were visible in the sky. Vela had been brought to the Grand Palace by Lord Sareth himself. The king had finally agreed to let her return. He had not spoken to her directly, but he had opened the gates. The labor was long and difficult. Vela screamed and cried as her body struggled to deliver the hybrid child. Dowan held her hand through all of it. He whispered encouragements. He wiped the sweat from her forehead. He told her that she was strong, that she could do this, that their daughter was almost here. Finally, with one last push, the child emerged into the world. She was beautiful. Her skin was silver like her mother's, but with a softer shine that reminded Dowan of moonlight on water. Her eyes were dark like his, filled with curiosity and warmth. She had 4 tiny arms, but her fingers were delicate and human-shaped. When she opened her mouth and cried for the first time, the sound echoed through the palace halls, strong and clear, full of life. The doctors examined her carefully. They checked every part of her body. They tested her blood and her brain and her heart. When they finished, they looked at each other in amazement. "She is perfect," the head doctor announced. "Healthier than any pure Keth child I have seen in centuries." Word spread quickly. The heir had been born. She was healthy. She was strong. She was the future of the empire. King Tharos came to see his granddaughter the next day. He walked slowly through the halls of the palace, his footsteps heavy with age and doubt. Vela watched him approach the cradle where the baby slept. She did not know what to expect. Anger? Rejection? Violence? The king stopped at the edge of the cradle and looked down at the tiny creature. She was sleeping peacefully, her 4 hands curled into little fists, her dark eyes closed. She looked so small, so fragile, so impossible. He reached down with one trembling hand. The baby stirred. Her eyes opened slightly. She looked up at the ancient Keth, who had ruled the empire for 10,000 years. Then her tiny fingers wrapped around his finger and held on. Something broke inside King Tharos. Something that had been frozen for centuries finally melted. His eyes filled with tears that he had not shed since he was a child himself. "What will you name her?" he asked quietly, without looking away from the baby. Vela glanced at Dowan, who smiled and nodded. "Yuna," Vela answered. It is a human word. It means to allow, because she will allow our peoples to become something greater than either of us could be alone. The king said nothing. He simply stood there, letting his granddaughter hold his finger, feeling the warmth of her tiny hand. Outside the palace, the people of the Keth Empire celebrated. They danced in the streets. They sang ancient songs. They looked up at the stars and imagined a future they had stopped believing in. The empire would survive. Not through purity, as they had always believed. Not through isolation or pride, but through connection, through change, through the stubborn, relentless, impossibly hopeful nature of humanity. And somewhere far away, on a small blue planet called Earth, people looked up at the night sky and wondered what the future would bring. They did not know that the answer was already born. A tiny princess with silver skin and dark eyes, sleeping peacefully in a palace among the stars, half Keth, half human. Entirely new thought the beginning of something wonderful.